Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, our Cinemaniacs, to another episode of Den of Sins with Devin and James. Hey, Devin, how are you doing during this? For here where I'm at in San Antonio, it's actually cooling down, but it's still a relatively warm day in October. But how are you doing today?
Well, funny you should say, we're getting heat advisories here in Orange County. And thanks to having slightly more than a sniffle and a cough this weekend, I am quarantined to my bedroom awaiting results on something that I have a feeling will be negative, but taking every precaution as we all should. But I can say that being in this room for 5 days so far in this heat is not making me feel any better. And my poor wife is doing everything because we're keeping my stepdaughter in her room this whole time too to keep everybody safe. So my wife is having to cook, clean. Hey, can you grab this for me? Can you give me a cup of water? She found that helping with homework is particularly hard when he's not in the same room. So shout out to my wife for doing such a fantastic job of taking care of her family.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. Is like people don't even think about, but when that's how if you're doing it responsibly and doing it smartly, you need self-isolate, and that includes being isolated from your own family sometimes. And not only is that a stress on the person who might be going through COVID, but also on the family and the extra responsibilities and stuff. So it's something to consider, ladies and gentlemen, about being responsible, being smart, being careful, and being healthy, making the right decisions. So Devin, very excited about this week. I feel like this one definitely shouldn't be a 2 or 3 parter.
It shouldn't be. It very well could have been had we planned it that way, because there's a lot to unpack here. Over
100 films that he's been in. Ladies and gentlemen, to this week's episode, we are going to talk about the films. I think we're going to talk about specifically the most memorable, as far as I'm concerned, the most memorable performances of one Willem Dafoe. Now, Devin, I do want to preface this by saying, as often as unprepared as I am on this podcast, this week I was like, I want to revisit a lot of the films of his I love that I'm really, a fan of. And so it's really fresh in the mind, and also visit, do have some first-time viewings of some of his films I've been meaning to get to. But unfortunately, the best laid plans of men this week has been a total shit show. It's been super chaotic for a multitude, of reasons that I won't get into in the podcast. But yeah, just my whole week, my week prep for this podcast sort of went out the door, and things that kind of needed more of my attention priority-wise. But I am really excited, even just sort of mentally compiling the movies I wanted to talk about, kept going, oh yeah, what about this movie? But again, he's a prolific actor, and he's been acting for a long time, and he's been in a lot of very important films and very memorable films. So I'm excited to talk about it. So do you have any specific, before we go into it, Devin, do you have any specific, sort of relationship with this actor, or anything that sort of makes this actor really interesting to you?
I've just always loved him. I've loved his face. I've known his face longer than I've known his name, although I was pretty well acquainted his name early on too, which for anyone out there who's not in the loop, which I think most of us are at this point, it is Willem Dafoe, not William Dafoe. There was actually even a bit about this on this weekend's Family Guy. Joe kept on calling him William Dafoe, and it was driving everybody crazy. Funny enough, I did learn this week that his real name is William Dafoe.
William, that's right.
He started to go by Willem in college, which is the Dutch pronunciation of his name, I believe, and as a way of setting himself apart, as if he did not know about his own cheekbones. But
exactly.
I do have a personal story about Willem Dafoe, though, that I'll go into real quick here.
Let's hear it.
Well, everybody knows at this point I like to brag about the movie theater I worked at in New York City. Everybody that worked there was an artist of some kind, most of us in the visual arts. There was a guy named Daniel who was one of the actors who worked there. And Daniel was a little bit older than me. He's younger than me at my age now, but older than me at the time. He had grown up in New York City and therefore had worked on stage with a lot of really great names that weren't great names yet. And every now and again, one of his old buddies would come into the theater and he would introduce me to them. And I would get to have this 2-second interaction with an up close personal interaction where I get to see these amazing people kind of bro down with somebody I knew. He's just to give you a quick lineup. There was Philip Seymour Hoffman I got to meet this way. And
incredible.
Joe Latruglio from The State and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Sam Rockwell.
Yep.
And then one day I'm sitting in the theater and I see Willem Dafoe walk in, and I'm standing next to Daniel, and my eyes are on Dafoe, and he turns our direction, and his eyes light up when he sees Daniel, and I instantly know, oh, fuck, in about 10 seconds, I'm going to meet Willem Dafoe. And he walks straight over to us, gives Daniel a big hug, gives that huge Willem Dafoe smile that almost landed him the part of the Joker. And Daniel says, this is my buddy Devin. He's a writer. And I extend my hand to shake, and Willem Dafoe bats it away and gives me a giant bear hug. And then he went on to watch his movie. They talked for about 30 seconds, but, he went on to watch his movie. But my one experience with Willem Dafoe was him giving me a hug, and I thought that was the coolest thing. It kind of told me everything I needed to know about the dude.
Well, first off, that's incredible, and I'm unbelievably jealous. Willem Dafoe, we'll get into it, but Willem Dafoe has been in my life for a long time as far as a presence in my film watching and my film fandom. But one thing I have to say about Willem Dafoe, just as obviously, I don't know him in person. No, you can never really, and can you ever really know somebody if you want to get philosophical with it? But, I've seen countless interviews with him, countless talks with him. And one thing I love about Willem Dafoe is that he is obviously very idiosyncratic as far as there's these few actors, the John Malkoviches, the Christopher Walkens, these guys who are just, they have their own aura about them, their own presence, their own look or whatever. But
many of them who worked with Willem Dafoe, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, as I'm saying that.
Did.
Yeah. He just seems like such a very considerate, down to earth, but also very intelligent, very honest, but a truly artistic soul. His rationales for taking things aren't, on one hand, they aren't the pretentiousness that you see from some other actors, even though you can tell he definitely is a very articulate mind. He's an artistic soul. I do think at the end of the day, I think he's an artist, but he's just very weirdly, he combines that with being very approachable, down to earth, and very honest. He's very quick to, even in interviews, to admit his own failings and his own so just as a person, I've always been drawn to him because his spirit doesn't necessarily match his face, or at least, I feel like one thing that with Willem Dafoe,
it matches that smile. That smile is actually very kind, unless he's playing a villain.
Well, but here's the thing, though, and this is kind of goes into what I think his face with age has actually softened, because when he was younger, his face was more hard lines, and the youth of his face made him look more sinister. Sometimes the guys with age, with more character in their face, sometimes they can look a little bit more ominous. I'm thinking of guys like Mickey Rourke, although that's not necessarily all age either. But with Willem Dafoe, I feel like age has softened him a little bit, especially his early films. He had such a sinister look, even when he wasn't playing sinister characters. It's just the shape of his brow, the shape of his mouth, those very deep, weird cheekbones of his. He seems like a truly gentle soul, despite the films that he's kind of most known for, really. But yeah, I'm really excited to get into it. We won't pontificate too much, but let's get it started, Devin. I know you wanted to talk about one of his films first.
I think we can kind of jump around a little bit in terms of the lineage of this, but starting at the beginning is always a good idea.
Sure.
And right at the beginning, Willem Dafoe had 2 movies in which he co-starred with lots of leather and motorcycle.
That's right.
And I'm going to take one, you'll take the other. I'm going to start this off with Catherine Bigelow's directorial debut, The Loveless, which, have you ever seen The Loveless?
Yeah, in fact, I thought I was telling you, it's on the Criterion Network channel. I've always wanted to see it because I'm so familiar with his other one we'll talk about. But I just happened to watch it. I think even before we decided to do this podcast, my wife and I were watching it on the Criterion channel, which we pay annually for. And it was pretty fresh on my mind. I just saw it not that long ago.
Yeah, it's a really interesting film. It's very much The Wild Ones with Marlon Brando, redone in a 80s sort of way. It doesn't take place in the 80s. It takes place, I think, in the 50s. It could be early 60s. It's hard to tell when it comes to leather and motorcycles.
I think it's 61 or something.
Yeah, he plays a tough. They never really fully say that he's the leader of the gang, but you get kind of a feeling that he's the leader of the gang. And he just rides into this small town and has these great lines, sitting at a diner getting his coffee filled up, and he just looks at the waitress and says, "Anybody live around here?"
That's right. That's actually, honestly, that's even that scene when he's talking to the waitress is sort of, I think it's one of the more memorable scenes. And I think it really just says everything about the movie right there. It sets it up what the spirit of the movie is right away. So that particularly is one of my favorites.
And it's a good movie. I don't feel there's not much of a reason to dwell on it too long because it is such a simple story.
Yes.
But if you are a fan of cinematic nostalgia, and in particular, if you were a rockabilly person, there are a lot of rockabilly people out there. This is a movie you have to see because the rockabilly soundtrack is very authentic. It's a mix of new material and classic rockabilly. And, oh God, maybe you'll remember his name. There's his co-writer on in the Motorcycle Gang, is actually a rockabilly musician, and this was his last film. He didn't pass away. As far as I know, he's still alive and focusing on his music.
But he didn't. He stopped acting.
But he played a major role in this and was not bad. In fact, he was pretty good. But Willem Dafoe clearly comes across as the star. He did have a very small part in Heaven's Gate, which is technically his first movie, and he got fired off.
That's right. That's right.
And then ironically came back about 20, 25 years later and narrated the documentary about the mess that was Heaven's Gate.
That's funny because I've seen Heaven's Gate. I think I've seen the two major cuts, the TV cut, the much longer cut, and then the theatrical cut. But I remember when I was reviewing this, I was like, wait, Willem Dafoe was in Heaven's Gate? I don't remember that. And then he did a pretty small part, although his character does have a name. But yeah, I will say that I enjoyed Limitless. It's very much, it feels like a European film to me. I think it's the pacing, the sort of hazy quality to it. The fact that, like I said, there's not really a story. It's more, and I will say right away,
I was just going to interject. It doesn't have much of a story, and actually the only time the film really becomes flawed is when it tries to pretend that it has one.
Yes.
There is a subplot involving suicide that is super corny, and they aren't disrespectful to the subject. They're just giving it far too much weight for this character to have had an effect on the other character.
Yes, well said. Yes, but the one thing I was going to say is that right from the get-go, Willem Dafoe had such a presence. Again, physically, like he doesn't even need to say a word, and he's going to have presence because he's so peculiar looking and so striking looking. But just his whole vibe, like, is very believable, but it's also very unique, and you definitely can't take your eyes off of him. And even in this role, like he said, he's not, especially in the first part, he's not like some explosive, especially considering the roles he would go on to play later. His character is a little bit more cool, or like, he just seems dangerous, like, and it's a very natural, like, kind of dangerous, sort of similar to, although not in the, completely in a different way, but it's like To Live and Die in LA, which I don't know if you want to talk about, but he just has this presence where you're like, he seems like he could explode any minute, or just, you don't want to fuck with Willem Dafoe. But
exactly.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I think it's a strong, solid directorial debut with Laura Dern and Monty Montgomery.
Catherine Bigelow and Monty Montgomery.
Who did I say?
Laura Dern.
Oh, Laura Dern.
She will come up later,
she's on my
absolutely,
mind. Yes. Yeah, she is on my mind. But Catherine Bigelow. But yeah, so that's a good way to start, right? Kind of like at the beginning. Obviously, you've set this up so I can talk about a movie that's very important to me. A movie I talk about every chance I can get, but that is Streets of Fire. I'll tell a little bit of backstory. So that was a movie, again, I did grow up with. My mom was a fan of it. And it's, God, the vibe of that movie is so weird because it's supposed to take place post World War II, but there's so much like 80s-ness to it. Like all of the music is this weird 80s version of like doo-wop or 80s version of soul music. Like it's this weird kind of, it's got a weird vibe, but which I really like about it. And I think, I always thought Michael Pear was destined for bigger things. First off, I think he's one of the, like, I'm very comfortable in my heterosexuality, but he's one of the most beautiful. I think he's one of the most handsome men in cinematic history. I even remember thinking as a kid, I'm like, that I want to look like that guy. But I also thought he was a pretty good actor, and he had a good start with a few films, that and Eddie and the Cruisers, but he ended up sort of becoming more of a B actor. But I thought he was really great in this, and
I think he was kind of. I don't quote me on this necessarily, which is a funny thing to say in a podcast, but I get the feeling that he was a little bit of a dick, and maybe that's what lost him some roles. He seems in interviews about this movie specifically, about Streets of Fire, like he had beef with Rick Moranis, which is the only thing. There's only one human being that could ever have beef with Rick Moranis, and it's Michael Pear, apparently. And he made it sound like it was
well, and that guy in New York recently too. But yeah,
true. But I think if that dude knew who he was hitting, he probably would have felt bad.
I would hope so. By the way, too, can I just say, I could have brought this up before in other places, but I know this is a podcast about, we're doing this episode about Willem Dafoe, but I love that movie, and I love Rick Moranis' performance in that movie because he's playing so against type of the kind of characters he normally plays, and he's so fucking good at it. I think the performance is all around. I'm forgetting the name of the actress, but she basically plays like this sort of female.
The best.
She's
friend?
Like this yes, like this sort of
Amy Madigan, I believe is her name.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah, and the brunette from Too Close for Comfort.
She's Uncle Buck's girlfriend.
Uncle Buck's girlfriend. That's right. Yes, like I said, she's very like not asexual, that's not the right term. She's very androgynous and stuff, and but she's just such an interesting character, and she's played so well.
The part was written for a man, actually. It was supposed to be.
See, I didn't know that.
In rumor, anyways, it's supposed to be Edward James Olmos. But
interesting.
She auditioned for another part in the movie, and her and Walter Hill hit it off. And she's like, "Look, I can play this part. If you just rewrite him, I can play this part." And he had enough faith in her, and he went for it. And it was a good choice, very good choice.
Yeah, no, and again, just very unique decision. So let's talk about Raven Shattuck in the pantheon of. I will give you some backstory of how important not only this movie, but specifically Willem Dafoe in this movie is. And Devin, I think you already know this, but in the early 2000s, me and my twin brother made our first self-published comic. It kind of like a rock and roll superhero, very much influenced by like early Stones, early Who, kind of a mod, early rock and roll superhero kind of guy. Interesting story, but won't go into all of it. My twin brother, who really was sort of, he sort of, it was his story to tell in our collaboration. He ended up drawing the villain in the comic, and the name of the character is the Big Bad Wolf. And I looked at it, and even though he doesn't necessarily look exactly like I immediately could tell, I'm like, this dude is based off of Raven Shattuck, isn't he? And yeah, and like, in the comic, he's a much more like thicker, almost werewolf type of character, but
I've read that comic and I never put it together, but I'm seeing it in my head now, and I don't know how I didn't put that together.
Yeah, we were both like, again, he's just everything. Like, it's such a weird movie. The thing is, the vibe of the movie is completely its own. But Raven Shattuck is this larger than life character. Like, it's a rockabilly kind of vibe. He's like playing this like 60s motorcycle guy, but he wears like vinyl fucking overalls with no shirt on, and he has the craziest swoop ever, like his ducktail and his like little. It's
one of the best ducktails in movie history.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. But the whole movie is so, and it's got Lee Ving from the band Fear, who also went to do some other acting. But I remember, being very afraid of the band Fear when I was a kid. One of the early punk, New York punk bands, and I don't know if they're actually New York too. Maybe it might have been California. I actually shouldn't even say that. But anyways, an early punk band Fear. Anyways, they're a really interesting band. But I mean, like Lee Ving is in it. He plays he basically actually plays, I think, Raven Shattuck's sort of right hand man. But he steals the whole movie. Every time he's on screen, he steals the whole movie. And I thought, like growing up, I just thought that was something that me and my twin brother felt. Like, we were such a fan of the movie and specifically his performance. But as I've grown up and talked about people who've seen the movie, the very first thing they always say is, dude, Raven Shattuck, Willem Dafoe in the movie. And it's become sort of a thing, that a linchpin when I meet somebody of like mind and we connect on that. It's like a real bond. But it's a very memorable movie. Like I said, I don't think it's one of, he's made such, at this point, so many memorable movies and very beloved movies. Some of those I'm not a fan of, but I think this one gets lost in the shuffle. But the fans of it are diehard fans of this movie. And
you're absolutely right on all those points. But I did want to bring up director Walter Hill. This was a dream project for Hill. He initially wanted to do it as a trilogy, but its underperformance theatrically, of course, made that an impossibility. But he did say, and this is. Oh, and first off, if anyone doesn't immediately recognize the name Walter Hill, then you don't watch enough movies.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
But he directed Hard Times with Charlie Bronson, 48 Hours with Nolte and Murphy, and The Warriors.
The Warriors, one of the best movies ever.
And in fact, The Warriors, out of all of Hill's films, is probably the best double feature with Streets of Fire. So
yes.
If you're a fan of The Warriors, Streets of Fire is your next go-to. But he has spoken about why he wanted to make Streets of Fire in the first place. He wrote it and directed it. He basically said that he wanted to make a movie that was his idea of what a perfect movie would be when he was a teenager. And I'm going to read this actually straight from the list. This is his exact list of what he thought was cool as a teenager. Custom cars, kissing in the rain, neon, trains in the night, high-speed pursuit, rumbles, rock stars, motorcycles, jokes in tough situations, leather jackets, and questions of honor. And I think that Streets of Fire pretty much nails all of those things. And
you know what? That's a good list of cool things, man.
I just kind of love a few filmmakers have had the chance to do this. Hopefully I'll be lucky enough someday too, because I totally get it, to try to make a movie for that 13-year-old in their soul. And this was Walter Hill's contribution to the
And
movie.
I will say, there's something I think what you think is cool at 13, like right around that age, like right at early teen, when you just sort of discover like what you think is cool rather than what, your parents say is cool, or I think that stays with you for life. And I think that's why so many people will sort of especially artists will sort of at some point in their career kind of want to fulfill those, and as somebody with Arrested Development myself, I still collect action figures and all sorts of things. Like, I definitely relate to that, but also you can tell like the period he grew up in. We should do a whole episode about Walter Hill because his filmography is very interesting and funny, because some of the movies that, like, I would say people of his that aren't quote unquote loved are some of my favorites. Well, we should definitely revisit Walter Hill. One other thing I do want to say though about Street Fire is the opening sequence is one of the toughest opening sequences in film history, when Michael Pear sort of shows up to his sister's diner and sort of saves her from those young toughs or whatever. There's just, the movie's just dripping with coolness as far as my 13-year-old self thought that was super cool. So
yes, it's very true. I actually think one of the main reasons why I mentioned Walter Hill's intentions with this is because the film has a lot of critics. And I think that most people, if they go in understanding the spectacles that he was wearing as he directed it, once they get that knowledge of why the movie was made, I think they're going to appreciate the movie much more. I think even a lot of the detractors against the movie would find it hard to argue that certain things are cool to a 13-year-old, and that's why they're in there.
Yeah.
But it took a director with the talent of Walter Hill to make that work. And actually, there's another movie I'll bring up later where I don't think it works at all. But we'll
I'm curious to see which one that is. But yeah, no, I think it's great, and I think it's a perfect example of a completely different role from Loveless. Almost, they're visually very similar characters, sort of like head-to-toe leather, rockabilly kind of character. They're very different. I mean, one is more subdued and a little bit more portrayed a little bit more honestly, a little more realistically. And then Raven Shaddock is fucking a comic book villain. He's a cartoon. Yeah. Like, he's as evil and as menacing as any sort of larger than life, cinematic or villainous, icon. But yeah, let's move on.
All right. Well, briefly, you mentioned it, and I think most people know about this movie, but just to give it a shout out, to Live and Die in LA was really worthy of mention, primarily because it was his real breakout. Those other films, Loveless was a small film. Streets of Fire was not particularly successful. But To Live and Die in L.A. was a huge hit for William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist and The French Connection and Sorcerer. This was more of a French Connection-y sort of movie with kind of not a crooked cop, but a cop that's definitely willing to scrape the underbelly to get his job done. And Willem Dafoe plays the villain in this movie. And he's actually talked about his star turn in this, because he's mentioned that when he was young enough when the movie came out that he was still, as a young man himself, going to nightclubs. And he says that was the first time where he started to go to nightclubs and people would come up to him and be like, dude, Rick Masters, because he was such a badass. That's his character. And I also wanted to say, just because it's something you don't see anymore, this is an action movie where the cops are going after a money counterfeiter. This guy wasn't trying to dominate the world or destroy the world or whatever. He was just trying to make fake money. And this tough cop was going to stop at nothing to get him. I'd like to go back to a style of movie where the stakes are about on that level. It's still an intriguing story and didn't have to involve the destruction of all of Los Angeles to make it work.
Exactly. It's not Speed or something where it's.
Yeah. Though it does have a freeway car chase.
That's right. It does. Yeah, it's definitely a film. It's funny because like William Peterson didn't really have a big career.
Yeah, he had some really high profile parts.
Yeah, but, he's always good. But
he was Pat Garrett in Young Guns too. How was that not a star making turn?
But yeah, he just never clicked. And I do think he is a little overshadowed by Willem Dafoe in this because again, it's Willem Dafoe. He's going to be. You can't. Like William Peterson's just a relatively. He's like every man, good looking kind of guy. He's cool enough, but Willem Dafoe is fucking Willem Dafoe. He's like an alien. So like I do think it's William Friedkin. It's definitely worth watching. Is it the greatest movie ever? No, but I do think it's definitely worth a watch. And again, I think the performances are great. And I do think specifically Willem Dafoe is great in it too. So
absolutely. And it was almost Harrison Ford in that Peterson role, which I can see why Ford passed on it. Richard Gere and Harrison Ford were both up for it. Spoiler alert, anyone that doesn't want to know the last 15 minutes of To Live and Die in L.A., go ahead and fade out now for about the next 10 seconds. But here's the bottom line. Harrison Ford's not going to do a movie where he gets his face shot off 15 minutes before the movie's done.
That's right.
But I applaud Peterson for taking it, and I applaud Friedkin for for taking out his lead character that early in the climax, which was a very Friedkin move. If you ever studied Friedkin.
Yes.
It's a very, very, very Friedkin move to very graphically blow the face off the main actor before he achieves his goal.
One thing I do think of it's interesting because it had this sort of, I don't know if, I mean, this is more my impression than anything based in fact, but mid-'80s, I feel like a lot of movies that came out in like the mid-'90s had a very similar vibe to it, especially like the whole, that whole like slightly noir-inspired kind of like stylish action film thing that was happening in the mid-'90s. I feel like sort of owes a little bit to this. There's a lot of...
You're right.
I don't know. To me, there seems
you're
like...
absolutely right.
Yeah. I think there's a similar vibe, but yeah. What else, Devin? What's the next one that we need to discuss? Well, I am letting you sort of choose the chronological film choices here.
Well, here's the thing. We don't want this to be a two-parter, so I think we can kind of assume that everyone has already talked about Platoon and Last Temptation of Christ.
Yes.
Two great films.
Great movies.
People should see it. People should stop worrying so much about Last Temptation of Christ. It's a philosophical exploration as to what Christ would have been like as a man, since the Bible doesn't go into that part of Christ's story.
Yeah. I actually had a very personal story. One of my first times as a person, as a junior high school kid, or not even junior, sixth grader, seventh grader, maybe at this point, at sixth or seventh grader. My good friend from Australia, Nathan Speckman and his family, very nice people. They loved me and my twin brother, but they're very religious, and they went to go pick at that movie. And I remember being like, why are you going to pick at a movie? Like, what's the point of that? Did the movie slap your baby? Like, yeah, it is a great movie. In fact, and
it's Scorsese. I mean, really, it's worthy of having its own podcast. I'm not dissing that or Platoon.
And I think Platoon, again, I will say though, I mean, to me, just even on your resume, I do believe it's the greatest cinema death scene in history. Yeah. It's also the most that's literally like the most pomp and circumstance a death could ever have on screen, but to a great effect. I mean, I do think it's one of Oliver Stone's best films. I think it's particularly that scene so well done, but you just go down in history being like, I had the best cinema death ever. And I will go on record as saying, I do think it is the greatest cinema death ever. But
Defoe has a few of the best cinematic deaths ever. In fact, I was going to say a little bit more about Last Temptation there, but since we're talking about cinema deaths, well, actually, Last Temptation has also one of the most notorious cinema deaths. But let's talk about Wild at Heart briefly.
Oh, yes. That was one of the movies. So as I said at the beginning, like I wanted to kind of rewatch because it's been, probably 10, maybe more years since I've actually seen Wild at Heart.
Really? Because that's almost a perennial for me. Like I have to visit Bobby Peru like once a year, once every other year.
And the thing is, I love it. I think one thing with that movie though, for me, and as much as I love it, and I will definitely start talking about it in a second, is that I always felt, so my twin brother is a giant David Lynch fan, as you know, Devin, and he actually, I don't know if it was his first tattoo or one of his first tattoos, but he actually has the Wild at Heart. It's from one of the, I think it's an Italian poster, but the heart with the switchblade through it, and it says Wild at Heart. So I always sort of felt like I couldn't enjoy that movie as much as Joe because it's a weird, being a twin is very weird, but again, it's great. And let's get into it. Let's talk about Bobby Peru and his creepiness.
Well, first off, you've got to wade through a whole bunch of Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern and Harry Dean Stanton at the top of their games before you even get to Bobby Peru showing up. Bobby Peru is very much a side character. What he does has a major influence on the plot as to what happens to Nicolas Cage's character.
That is a good old don't tell me who's got a very not sinner, what is his name?
Out to sea.
Sailor Ripley. Thank you. I was like, it's not a very distinct name, but yes. Yeah, you said it perfectly. He's again, it takes a while in the movie before you get to him.
At least an hour into the movie before you even get to Bobby Peru showing up. But he's so gross and just looking at him makes you want to take a shower. He plays it so greasy, and he has this, I don't know what it is. It's like it's a prosthetic set of teeth, clearly, but it almost looks to me like it's a prosthetic set of baby teeth.
They're dentures, and they are. I mean, like David Lynch, when he conceived of the script, when he was writing the script based off of the book, he envisioned them as having these very gross little discolored teeth, little baby teeth. There's actually a medical thing for that. but basically little tooth nubs. And Willem Dafoe was like, okay, we're just going to do with this makeup or whatever. And he's like, no, man, you got to get some dentures. He's like, oh, okay, interesting. That's not where I thought this was going. But again, says so much about one thing about David Lynch is that, man, he knows how to create, he has a very distinct vision, and he knows how to make a fully formed idea, even though sometimes his ideas are so far off the wall or so like hard to decipher. They're fully realized, and I think Willem Dafoe has gone on record as saying like that was one thing he enjoyed working with David Lynch, is because down to the costume it was a thing of like, yeah, here's what I want you to do, and but because it was so fully realized, Willem Dafoe was like, oh, this kind of frees me up. And, even how the teeth kind of, in the way he had to open his mouth, like it forced his mouth to sort of always be open in this weird sort of like lip snarl. And how that informed how sleazy the character became.
That's a good word
basically
for it.
A snarl. But
he's gross. There's a scene, it's actually a funny story. There's a scene where he is alone in a hotel room with Laura Dern, and it's a very intense scene. You would not want to be alone in a room with Bobby Peru, especially if you're a woman. And he's getting all creepy on her, and then announces, I got to go to the bathroom. And he turns around and starts peeing in the bathroom with the door open as like a form of kind of intimidation.
Yep.
Willem Dafoe found out after he did that was an improvisation on the set, and he found out after that it was just a prop toilet.
Oh, nice. I have a real quick story I do want to share, and it's about Last Temptation of Christ, and something that Willem Dafoe in certain circles is very well known for. Just want to tell it real quick. So I don't know if you're aware of this, Devin, but Willem Dafoe is pretty well known for having an impressive feature, we'll say.
Yes, I was going to mention this in another.
Yeah, so, there's I don't know if you know this story already. You seem to be very aware of these backstage stories, but, he's very well endowed. And on the set of Last Temptation, when he's actually getting crucified, his unit came out of his little Jesus-y rap. And Scorsese, told a PA, like, hey, you need to get somebody to put that back in. And the PA or the grip, whoever, was like, yeah, I think you need to call animal control for that. But the animal wrangler for that, basically referring to his giant man hog. But anyways, there's actually a video of him naked dancing, which is one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. Like a young Dafoe dancing this sort of weird interpretive hippie dance thing, fully nude, and it's very alarming. Anyway,
well, he did a lot of experimental theater, the Wooster
Theater in New York,
that he was very involved with for decades. That was actually where he got his start with experimental theater, just off Broadway. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. Like I said, we were going to go a little bit out of sequence here, I think. I just want to mention Mississippi Burning, because I think it's such a fantastic movie, but I also think that it is something that needs to be seen, but it needs to be seen with 20/20 eyes. I think this is a race movie for white people.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen?
A lot of race movies are for, especially 80s, 90s, and 2000s are for white people. So.
Yes, this is definitely a white man's burden story. All these people are suffering, and God, does it make Willem Dafoe suffer that all these people are suffering?
Yes.
But it's still such a great movie made by the recently late, great Alan Parker. Yeah. And I want to mention it largely because of Gene Hackman. And I thought that Willem Dafoe had such a great chemistry with Gene Hackman. And Hackman is just a powerhouse through it. I think that in the storyline, they give it a horrible plot flaw, which is to imply that there's any kind of a love affair between Gene Hackman's character and Frances McDormand's character. I think that was way out of line. I think it cheapens the whole movie, much like the same way that I felt that the love affair between Jamie Lee Curtis and Clancy Brown cheapened Blue Steel right there at the end. It just reeked of the studio wanted to have a love interest.
Yeah.
So if you can forgive it that, it still is a very passionate, very intense movie. It's not based on a true story, but it's inspired by a true story. And in a funny kind of way, like by the end, it almost becomes a canon film with its with its action sequences. But if you want to see some racist hillbillies get the shit kicked out of them and have their stuff blown up, then by all means check out Mississippi Burning. You could do a lot worse. Great performances.
Yeah, and again, very it speaks to the versatility even at this point of Willem Dafoe, because
it was the first
he's playing a very like
thing.
Very straight man to Gene Hackman's sort of loose cannon-y kind of more like, I will say like that movie really, I saw that movie in school, elementary school or early junior high, and it really fucked me up. In fact, I think it informed my own sense of empathy and things of like you said, even though it's very much the white man's burden, it's made to make white audiences feel better about themselves being, hey, I'm not that racist. It's still a great movie, and like I said, it enraged me as a kid. I had even trouble watching, and then they give you that audience relief at the end of like the release of watching it. Then some racists get some comeuppance, even if that should sometimes only found in cinema. But yeah, I think it's very much a quiet, it's an honest man trying to do an honest job and be rational in a situation that's a little irrational, but and again plays perfectly with Gene Hackman. But yeah, I think it's again to go from Bobby Peru, like not saying that they were filmed, but I'm just saying like it speaks to
they were within 2 years of each other. With Jesus in between, oddly enough.
With Jesus in between, that's right. I do want to say this real quick though too, is like for the longest time, I sort of had this thing like there's like the trio of definitive David Lynch villains. And you have like Frank Booth, you have like the Mystery Man, so let's talk about Robert Blake. But even though obviously William Blake or Robert Blake is a terrible human being in real life, as
we talk about a lot of horrible human beings on this show.
But one of the creepiest performances and characters exactly. Just acknowledge that he's a murdering scumbag. But again, and I think Bobby Peru is the third man in that little trio of cinematic. Because David Lynch did other cinematic villains, but I think Frank Booth, Bobby Peru, and the Mystery Man are sort of like that.
That's the trifecta.
They're so memorable. The trifecta of super creepy David Lynch villains. But yeah,
and honestly, I give double kudos to Dafoe, because in the case of Frank Booth, he's very clearly the antagonist of Blue Velvet, as opposed to Bobby Peru, who's actually a side character but managed to be so bad that he feels like he's the entire movie's villain.
Well, and like you said, there is
villain is probably, what would you say the villain in Wild at Heart is? Diane Ladd.
Yeah. Well, yes, because even like she sets up the whole story, and she's fucking worst mother of the year award. But the thing that I like about Bobby Peru though is like he's very vital to what ends up happening, and and again he may not be like the major heavy in the movie, as you said. That's you're dead on right with that. But he is one of the most slimy villains and most memorable. Again, even if somebody says like movie villains, Bobby Peru's just his ugly face, especially when he's got the ski mask on, like his face just pops into my head. So, and again, but poor Willem Dafoe has had to fight that stereotype though. Even without the greasy skin and the little creepy pedo mustache and the baby gums or the baby teeth, he's just he's been typecast as a villain a lot. So
he certainly
less and less these days.
Yeah, it's coming around, and I think it actually does have to do with your very astute observation that the more stony his face gets, it actually looks kinder.
Yeah, he's
probably a testament to himself. I think it's because the stoniness of his face reflects laugh lines.
Yeah, that might be true. Yes, that might be true. And again, if you ever see him in an interview, he is a very gregarious, smiley guy. But
he's very funny. And Vanity Fair, I think it is. They put out these. I don't know if they're exclusively to YouTube. I watch them on YouTube, but they do these full in-depth videos. Yes.
Yeah.
They're like half-hour videos of major actors and character actors talking about their own films themselves. And there's a really great one on Willem Dafoe that everyone should check out.
I've seen it. Yeah. In fact, I've seen all of those. I think sometimes though, it pisses me off that their film selection, because they'll always choose some movie in there. I'm like, that movie's terrible. Why are you making him talk about that? And not like in this case, no, why not Streets of Fire? But I get it if it's a more popular movie or more.
I definitely get it. And, another thing I'm just going to throw out there, we don't necessarily need to get into it because it's nothing but a cameo, but I love that he has a cameo in Crybaby by John Waters, just because I love John Waters. And I think it's...
Same, 100%.
I think it's cool that John Waters loves Willem Dafoe. And before this becomes the Bobby Peru show, Willem Dafoe has actually said that he wore his mustache in Wild at Heart as a tribute to
I almost made the reference. His creepy little pedo mustache. Dude, John Waters is a fucking dude. He's a hero. He's a hero to the people.
He is. Before we get into like two-parter land like we've been doing lately, I'm just going to breeze through some name drops of 90s movies, because I actually think Willem Dafoe's career which obviously is far from over, but I think his highlights are really the 80s and post-2000s. So I'm just going to breeze through a few names of 90s movies. Some
Sure.
of them are very big, but they aren't movies that make Willem Dafoe. A lot of people are big fans of White Sands. I frankly haven't seen it with Mickey Rourke. I don't know if you've seen it or if that's... Okay.
I have not.
Clear and Present Danger with Harrison Ford. The English Patient won Best Picture, and I really couldn't care because that year I was into a different kind of indie film. Speed 2, Cruise Control. I don't know who talked into doing that. Affliction, which again I also haven't seen, but this one I actually really need to see.
You've never seen Affliction?
I have never gotten around to seeing Affliction. If you want to talk about Affliction, I hand it entirely to you, because what a cast, what a director.
Dude, I will say this about Affliction is that movie. I honestly can't even talk about Willem Dafoe in that movie, because the two main performances of Nick Nolte and James Coburn, and again, it's got Sissy Spacek, one of probably my favorite actors of all time, and directed by Paul Schrader. But the two performances is Nick Nolte he is a powerhouse in that movie. There's a scene in that movie, and it will go down. I will never forget as long as I live. I saw this movie in the theater where he's basically. For those that haven't seen it, Nick Nolte basically plays he lives in this very small town, and he's like their sheriff or the head of their police department. He's a police officer, and James Coburn basically plays his unbelievably abusive and terrible father who just belittles him and degrades him, and he's like this awful human being. And the thing is that James Coburn is a terrible alcoholic, and
that's the affliction of the title, right?
Exactly, yes. And then there's this whole hunting accident thing that there's this. I mean, it's not a subplot; it's a plot point. But he's basically trying to solve this hunting accident. But rich people or powerful people are involved, and it's a cover up. But there's a scene where where Nick Nolte drinks all this whiskey, and he's basically the whole movie he's extra cranky because he has this tooth abscess and his tooth is killing him. And there's just this scene where Nick Nolte pulls out his own tooth and the blood starts pouring out of his starts dripping out of his mouth, and you see a real tear of pain / frustration / anger sort of go down Nick Nolte's face. And I remember being in theater thinking it was one of the most powerful things I'd ever seen. But it's a great movie. Willem Dafoe plays a likable character. It's not his movie. He's great in it. He's always great in it. But definitely the movie is James Coburn and Nick Nolte. James Coburn is one of the most hateable characters, but it's so powerful.
He finally won an Oscar for that movie too. Coburn's a fantastic actor. One of those Oscar wins later in life, and thankfully well deserved. Unlike not to speak ill of the dead, but of all the things that I've loved Jack Palance in, I don't think he should have gotten the Oscar for City Slickers, for example. Or
I
love
was just thinking about City Slickers, but I agree with you. Yeah.
I love Paul Newman. And I love Martin Scorsese, but Color of Money is not the movie that Paul Newman should have won Best Actor for, or no. Pacino in Scent of a Woman. It just every 5 to 10 years,
I agree, 100%.
They give out these Oscars for their I call them career Oscars. It was Coburn's turn, and it was actually for a movie that he was very deserving Oscar for. I think before we leave the 90s, I could probably spend up an entire podcast talking about how much I despise this movie. But before we leave the 90s, I think we have to say a word about the Boondock Saints.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Let me set this up.
Okay.
So in the early 80s, Walter Hill made Streets of Fire to satisfy the 13-year-old in his soul. And the Boondock Saints feels like it's a movie directed by a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
It is people love this movie, and we're probably getting people throwing beer cans at their Alexa right now, listening to this, throwing their headphones on the ground. But you know what? I
don't care.
I called out that they threw their beer cans because they have to be fucking raging alcoholics to love this movie. It's just...
We're just Irish.
Not even... It is
well, no, because there's an Irish...
so bad.
There's an
Yes.
Yes, I wasn't even saying that to make fun of, Irish.
I know where you're going with it.
There's an Irish pride involved in this movie that is just silly. But anyways,
how could anybody have Irish pride in this movie? It makes Irish people look like assholes.
Exactly, look like dipshits. But
yeah, there's no consistency. There's no character. This movie is one Willem Dafoe away from being as bad as The Room. And Willem Dafoe, as the one bright spot in the movie, can't even manage to pull off being a full bright spot in the movie because given so little to actually do that's decent. For anyone that doesn't know Boondock Saints, this is a rare vigilante movie that James and I hate.
That's right. Hate.
There's a whole movie about the making of this movie called Overnight, that if you can get your hands on it, I think it's on Tubi.
Is it? Because I thought I went to actually. Yeah,
I think
it's one of the most fascinating documentaries, especially in a documentary about like filmmaking and film history. One of the most like deliciously rewarding. Let me just real quick. I need to go off for a second. So
please do.
So at the time this movie came out, I was dating a girl at the time. She's a very nice girl, but we'll leave it there. But she knew I was a big fan because we were all in the mid to late 90s. We were all Tarantino fans. But she's like, oh, you like Reservoir Dogs? I saw a movie even better than Reservoir Dogs. I was like, what? She's like, yeah, this movie Boondock Saints. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll watch it. I've never been more mad at somebody I actually was like, then the next time we started, I'm like, that's the worst movie I've ever seen. And she's like, what? I'm like, that movie is. So here's what's funny about what you said earlier, Devin, about like fulfilling your inner 13-year-old. The difference between this and say, as far as I'm concerned, with Something Like Street of Fire is Walter Hill was a capable, intelligent filmmaker who captured the spirit of his 13-year-old self. Boondock Saints is like an actual 13-year-old tried to make a movie, and it's terrible because 13-year-olds shouldn't make movies. Everything about it's so. This movie is the film version of My Dad Can Beat Up Your Dad. Like it's the most. There's like it's so stupid on every level. And Willem Dafoe, who is the highlight of it, even though he's like people talked about Gary Oldman being like over the top in The Professional, but even how some people thought it was like is super over the top and he's rewarding. This is a similar scenario where people, even who maybe didn't like the movie, are like.
To the point, actually, interesting you bring up The Professional. I hadn't thought about that. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say,
no worries.
There's another movie that Troy Duffy rips off in this movie. Everything's a rip-off of Tarantino and all the other indie films. Yep. I didn't put it. I was trying to figure out how Willem Dafoe fit into all that. It's Gary Oldman in The Professional. Okay, continue, but you nailed it.
Yeah, and it's Willem Dafoe in this because of his sheer talent. And I will say, like, they wrote him an interesting enough character because he's like this, like, I don't know. He's openly gay, but he's also this like weirdly like alpha male yelling at people.
It could have been a really interesting gay character if they had not put him in drag for the third act. Troy Duffy he's so incapable of having a full mature thought that he steps on his own good ideas. But he is, I mean, it's worth it seeing it once because it is such a train wreck of a movie. What's that? So I doubt even that.
Well, I was going to say, to me, it's interesting to see it once just because of seeing like Willem Dafoe's kind of batshit performance and what he does with it. But I would say it's the only thing that's even remotely redeemable. I think Willem Dafoe actually says like he had fun making the movie but I just like, dude, that movie. And I'm sure there's a weird segment of people who are like super into like, I don't know, like people really love Nightmare Before Christmas. And Nightmare Before Christmas is fine. I don't hate Nightmare Before Christmas. But the people who sort of like think that movie deserves more credit than it actually deserves, people like Conor McGregor fans, but that's also kind of the Irish thing. But there's just a certain segment of the population that are just very loud and very like aggressively. I don't want to get too excited. Let's move on. It's
movies, and Nightmare Before Christmas is definitely one of them, where they are cult films, but the people that follow it don't think they're in a cult; they think they're in a religion.
Well, here's the thing: is I'm going to sum it up. This is my way. There are people who think Nightmare Before Christmas is some like cult movie, some like. Nobody's ever like they're like special because they've heard of this movie. Meanwhile, it's a very well. It's like, come on, man, like calm yourself. It's like people
live in Anaheim. Like everything becomes Nightmare Before Christmas this time of year. Everybody knows this movie.
Yes,
get over it.
Yes, it's one of the good movie. Yeah, it's a fun movie. I liked it when it first came out. I like stop motion. The music is really enjoyable. But it's become this thing where people think, oh, liking Nightmare Before Christmas isn't a personality. It's not like it's just like smoking weed isn't a personality. It's a thing you enjoy, but like people have like sort of glommed onto it as like, I love Nightmare Before Christmas. It's like, yeah, and I like fried chicken. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, but this is one of those movies. It's like dudes that think trench coats are cool. And anyways, everything you need to know about Troy Duffy as a human being is the cover of him and his shitty band's record, their debut album. That cover says everything you need to know about this guy, and it's not good. But anyways, now that we've ostracized a segment of our possible audience here, let's move on.
Well, another one that's divisive, and I don't have a lot to say on. I don't know if you would, but he was in American Psycho, which is another film that people tend to either love or hate. I fall more on the appreciative side of it, but it's still not something that I rave about.
Again, this is the perfect sister movie to Boondock Saints. In fact, I guarantee you most people who are super psyched about one are super psyched about the other.
Yeah.
Again, I do think...
It's not worthy of the hatred that Boondock Saints...
No, by no means. But it is a little like, I get it.
With American Psycho, I at least get it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't enjoy it, I just don't get it.
It's an interesting movie that has like really good performances and really funny aspects to it.
The Huey Lewis stuff is hysterical. It's
yeah.
I can enjoy that one.
I've never read the Bret Easton Ellis novel. I've read a few Bret Easton Ellis novels, but his writing never really clicked with me the way he has done for some people. But I'd be really curious to actually read the book. But
I would too. I love his podcast, but he is self-professed a pretentious asshole.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's fun to listen to.
But
check out.
But
his
I will
podcast.
say this, I will. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely better than Boondock Saints. But Willem Dafoe, it's another one of those things where Willem Dafoe is fine in it, but he's not super memorable because that movie really is. I mean, it's almost like a one-man play. It's everybody else in the movie is incidental to Christian Bale and his whole, and the movie is this sort of inside this man's psychosis or his imagination, and
I had to be reminded that he was even in it. I had forgotten he was
exactly.
I was looking up the IMDb. I'm like, oh yeah, Willem Dafoe is in American Psycho. But it's
right.
a Christian Bale movie through and through. And he does a really interesting job of it. Not my favorite performance of his either, but he does a really interesting job. It's a deserving breakout movie. But also in 2000, he did a movie called Animal Factory that I don't think people have seen or given enough attention to. Did you ever see Animal Factory?
No, and it's funny, as I said, there's a few I want to see. I wanted to see Pasolini. There's because I do like Abel Ferrara, but there's a few that I wanted to see, and that was one of them.
It was funny enough. I had never seen Animal Factory until gearing up for this, and I did see Pasolini gearing up for this. Of the two, I actually prefer Animal Factory. It's the second film directed by Steve Buscemi. And he does a fantastic job directing it. It's a prison movie, kind of near about the same era as Shawshank Redemption a few years later, but kind of some similar things going on in terms of the friendship of the men on the inside, except for Red never told Andy that if he came back to prison, he would fuck him. A lot of it does come from the fact that Willem Dafoe takes Edward Furlong, who I usually don't like, but is quite good in this. Partly because he's playing the right role for him. He's playing a rich boy who ends up in prison.
Interesting. Okay.
And he's being told repeatedly.
I'll be honest, that was literally one of the main reasons I haven't seen it is because I truly dislike Edward Furlong.
Same here, but I am going to say don't be deterred by Furlong in this one. He's not the highlight, but he does not mess it up. He does a fine job. He's got the right role for him. And it's kind of prison rape isn't funny, and we need to stop making prison rape jokes because rape isn't funny in prison or outside of prison or anywhere. Correct. And I urge any of my brother and sister screenwriters out there, stop writing prison rape. And even more than that, stop writing prison rape jokes. All that being said, the prison rapist in this movie is Tom Arnold, which is kind of satisfying to see Tom Arnold get his comeuppance. Probably Tom Arnold's best performance outside of True Lies.
True, man. Yeah.
I think he's uncredited too, because I remember being surprised that he popped up, and I didn't think I saw his name in the credits. Someone who's definitely credited, very high up actually, is Danny Trejo. He was an executive producer on this. And
oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's one of the only
things I can think of.
Yeah, Trejo is playing a character in this. He's not playing Machete, he's not playing the badass. He's actually playing just a dude. A dude in prison, but a dude. And he does a very good job. He's Willem Dafoe's best friend in this. And it's written and also features a performance by the late, great Eddie Bunker, who I meant to mention last time when we were talking about Runaway Train, because Trejo and Bunker both appear in Runaway Train. And Bunker and Trejo did time together in San Quentin and in real life. And Bunker was in and out of prison all of his life and decided at one point that he was tired of it. He found out that he could write in prison. So he started to write books, and then he got out of prison and his book started to sell. And then Dustin Hoffman came knocking and one of his books was turned into a movie. And so that led Eddie Bunker to the next logical step, which, well, maybe I should go into acting too. And so he's probably best known as Mr. Blue in Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, exactly.
He inspired a lot of Tarantino's writing in general. And you can very much feel this is an Eddie Bunker story if you know anything about him. But I wanted to give him an extra shout out in this because he didn't get the shout out for having written Runaway Train from the story by Akira Kurosawa. But a very talented person who often his real life reputation kind of overshadows the talent that he brought out of prison. And he really did straighten up his life, much like Trejo. And it makes sense that they were both friends. And I think it's kind of funny that Eddie Bunker ratted out Trejo and saying that Trejo was the prison gossip when they were in together.
I love it. The one thing about Eddie Bunker, though, too, is that he has a very similar face to Danny Trejo. Like, almost as like if being in prison, shockingly, is hard on the person. But they have these bold, like very like their skin is similar. In fact, Eddie Bunker kind of looks like a white version of Danny Trejo.
A little bit. I can see that.
At least to me. Like the facial hair, the sort of pockmarked skin.
But anyways. I love that their brotherhood existed and that when they got out of prison together, well, I don't know that they got out of prison together, but when they were both out of prison together.
Both out of prison.
They both worked together multiple times and really supported each other and kept each other's ass out of prison again. So true redemption story. I don't know the full details on just how far the shittiness went during their prison days, but they definitely did their time and came out reformed, which you don't hear often enough, and is actually I wouldn't say that they're good prison stories, but obviously there's a happy ending involved for Eddie Bunker and Danny Trejo. Eddie Bunker's now gone. Danny Trejo sells tacos, and they're really good tacos. That's right.
In fact, we was just on a different podcast. I was just saying how I wanted to try some. So, anyways, you're saying.
I was going to mention the next film, also in the same year, because suddenly in the 2000s, this is when Dafoe got really prolific. And I think we actually saw this movie in the theater together, if I'm not mistaken. Shadow of the Vampire.
Yeah, we did. That's right.
And I remember not being a huge fan of it when I first saw it, but I really think once I saw it again, I realized I think I was just in a bad mood that day.
You know what? Actually, so I'll be honest, because I was just sort of revisiting this movie in my head. I think I was expecting something different or something more. I don't know. I just think I was expecting something different. And I think the humor in this is it's not that it's subtle at all, but it's, I don't know. I think both Malkovich as Murnau and Malkovich as Murnau and Dafoe as the vampire. Is his name Max Schreck in it, or do they never? I don't remember that. Anyways, because the actor, he's based off of.
I can't remember. This honestly was on my list to rewatch, but it is nowhere to be found. It is nowhere. Yeah. It's not even on DVD anymore. You cannot find this movie unless you're willing to spend like a minimum of like $30 or $40. And I don't recall liking it enough to want to spend that money. I did like To Live and Die in LA enough to spend that money, though. That is just recently went out of print. I don't know what's going to happen because it's part of the Disney 20th Century Fox thing. Shout Factory had put out a To Live and Die in LA, which if you have a spare $100, you can pick up. I got the original Fox Blu-ray, which you can still pick up for like $20-$30 on eBay. But yeah,
dude, I'm kicking myself in the ass. I was like, dude, I never got that Blackula 2-pack from Shout Factory. I was like, let me grab that. Oh, it's $120. Oh, no, I guess I'm going to wait on that. So I was like super bummed. I was like, damn, it's already up that high? I didn't realize it had gone up that much. But although I did rewatch both. But anyways.
Drawing off of 20-year-old memories, I think you nailed it. I think it's a film that never quite found itself. It couldn't figure out if it wanted to be funny or if it's a horror movie. It's certainly not a biofilm outside of the most meta possible way.
Nope.
So it really didn't end up belonging to any of the genres, but did include really fantastic performances. And Nicolas Cage produced it, so it was Bobby Peru and Sailor Ripley.
That's right.
Together again, even if not on screen.
Yep, exactly. I think the rumor was that Nicolas Cage wanted to actually, like, he was developing it with this company for himself to star. And if you actually look at Nicolas Cage's face, especially his profile, I was like, you actually look way more like Nosferatu than Willem Dafoe does.
He could have,
especially like the no.
He definitely could have done it. Cage doesn't get enough
He's
credit.
already
We
done
talked about it here.
He's already done the one of the greatest vampire movies ever with Kiss of the Vampire. So I don't, I've already seen him play a batshit vampire. So, but I mean, well, the movie is a Willem Dafoe vehicle. It's basically watching Willem Dafoe chew scenery as a very spooky German vampire and basically like say very dark, terrible things and stuff. Again, I when the movie came out, I wanted to love it. I remember we were all so psyched because again, the premise is so. It's almost like something Bruce Campbell would star in, where it's like, so we're going to make a movie about, like a biopic about the film Nosferatu, the making Nosferatu. But guess what? Nosferatu was really a vampire. We're going to find a real vampire. And it's like, oh, that could be dumb fun. But the movie.
It could have been Bubba Hotep.
Exactly.
Sort of style, which
some Joe R. Lansdale / Don Coscarelli. But yeah, I mean, but I do think it's interesting just because, again, I think the makeup effects were great. I think Willem Dafoe is he's so genuinely creepy. Yeah, exactly. And he deserved it. But the rest of the movie, I don't know. Again, same as you, I'm like, I need to rewatch that because I don't know if it was just sort of like I had my expectations too high or maybe I was just expecting something different. I do remember being like, this is the movie I thought it was going to be, but he's great in it. And it's, even rewatching some highlights of Dafoe's performances when that comes up, I am drawn to it because one, I like Nosferatu, I like vampires, I like horror, and I think it's an interesting performance, and I think the look of it, they nailed it.
They did nail the look. I'm going to go a little out of lineage here just for a second because there is another connection between Cage and Dafoe. It's a more recent movie. In fact, it was 2016, so it's not that old, but it was called Dog Eat Dog. Did you see Dog Eat Dog?
No. There's a short list. That was one of them. Although I remember when it came out, I remember being like, it didn't look super great. So I don't know.
I had the same experience, but as luck would have it, I've had 5 days to sit around in my bedroom. And so I popped on Dog Eat Dog. I can't remember which channel it was on. It was streaming somewhere. It's a Paul Schrader movie, so that is what ultimately sold me on it. I'm like, Cage and Dafoe and a direct-to-video thing could really go either way, but it's Paul Schrader, so it's worth a shot. Schrader being one of the people that worked with Dafoe quite a bit. Schrader and Abel Ferrara worked with Dafoe quite a lot right now. In fact, anytime a Dafoe movie comes out, there's probably a 50-50 shot of it being one of those two directors at this point. But anyway, I did watch Dog Eat Dog.
And the thing is, I'm a giant Schrader fan, and
it's fun. It's a lot of fun. If you just sit back and eat some popcorn, you're going to enjoy yourself. Nicolas Cage is at his over-the-top best, playing a gangster. So there's a little bit of Cage swagger. He's in a blue suit and kind of walking around like his shoulders don't belong to the rest of his body, and saying lines that you can tell that Nicolas Cage probably thinks sound real cool, but really just sound real Nicolas Cagey.
That's right. Yeah.
And Dafoe plays a guy that he got out of prison with, and actually, I think, you know what, now that I think about it, I think this was based on an Eddie Bunker book. Bunker was dead already in real life, but I think that this script was taken from a book by Eddie Bunker. So it's another story about former prison inmates doing one more gig, but this time they're kidnapping a baby. And I will say that some of the joy in this movie comes from all of these gangsters and hard asses, including Paul Schrader in his first on-screen performance ever as the head gangster that Nicolas Cage works for. All of them are tiptoeing around the fact that they're kidnapping a baby. They're all bad dudes. But every time it comes up, like, okay, guys, we're going to do a kidnapping. We're going to kidnap a baby. I realize that's probably not the coolest. And the guy that's even hiring Nicolas Cage to do this job says, you know what? It's an infant, man. If the kid was like 4 years old, I'd say, fuck that. Don't do that. This kid ain't even going to remember. I
think I need to see this movie.
The bad guys are constantly talking about like, oh, this is fucked up. Do we do this? And they do it, of course. And it does have that sort of Pulp Fiction-y attention to comedy within a gangster setting. Sometimes the wrong people get shot, that sort of thing. Dafoe is really a creep. Like when you're first introduced to him, he does something that's just absolutely disgusting. And he spends the rest of the movie kind of psychoanalyzing himself. Like, hey, I did this thing and I feel real shitty and I'm realizing now I think I'm a shitty person. And he's like asking this other thug, like, hey, can you kind of help me become a better person? The psychology of these characters is fascinating. And so even though
very
it's not
Paul
a perfect
Schrader,
movie, yes, very Paul Schrader. I don't say that this is a great movie, but it is definitely If you're a fan of that genre, you should see this. Dog Eat Dog is a recommended movie, even if it's not a great movie.
I'm going to watch. Yeah, I mean, just even your review of it has sold it for me, so I might watch it tonight.
It's very tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, if you do, text me. Let me know what you think, because I know nobody else that's ever seen this or even heard of it, and I would love to have someone to kind of go back and forth, especially about Cage and Dafoe's characters. Right. Do we even want to get into Spider-Man?
Well, I'll say this. As a lifelong comic book fan and Green Goblin, fan, I actually, weirdly enough, I was a giant. I think he's one of the most iconically designed. Fuck Venom, fuck Carnage. It's all about Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus. Anyways, but it's one of the silliest performances of his career, but in such a glorious way that I hate their version of the Green Goblin as far as aesthetically and their whole thing, but Willem Dafoe is so great in his over the top. Like, he really got it. If any actor really in that movie sort of understood who Sam Raimi was as a filmmaker and sort of went with that vibe, because one second he's menacing and very like scary and truly kind of like psychotic and frightening. It's like kind of like comical and a little over the top. And again, there's a very high camp thing to the performance, but it is what it is. It's a Spider-Man movie. I am a big fan of the Raimi Spider-Man movies, but I definitely think Spider-Man 2 is the best of those films. But, Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man isn't a perfect movie, but it's fun. And I think one of the main reasons it is so fun is because Willem Dafoe was so, and I think visually like perfect, very interesting casting. I was happy. Like, I was happy with his performance. I still hate the design. They're like sort of robo. Design. No, it's ugly and stupid. And
that flat looking face. To point out though, real quick, before we stray too far off of the costume, I'll put this online. I'll post it as a Facebook post. There is actually effects tests done.
I was just about to bring this up.
Okay, well then you take
frightening.
It. You take it. Yes.
It's
for about an hour afterwards, when I'd close my eyes, I would see the face. Ah!
Yeah, no, it's one of the most frightening. Like, so if you're a fan of the comics, like, the cinematic version of Green Goblin is not the Green Goblin from the comics. In the comics, he's very much an actual kind of goblin with this like, buggy eyes and this very creepy smile and these big pointed ears and this floppy purple nightcap thing, which I'm a huge fan of, but I understand why maybe other people don't. But they actually really wanted to go much more like that Sam Raimi wanted to try that and have a very expressive kind of gargoyle-ish, ghoulish, goblin face. And they did these animatronic tests, and you can find the footage online, and they're fucking terrifying. They're genuinely creepy, and like it emotes and stuff. But I would have, to this day, I'm part of a Facebook group called Super Palookas, where we just talk about nerdy comic book stuff and specifically the losers of comicdom. But we've talked about multiple times of like things we most like, things we wish would have actually transpired in comic book cinema history, such as Nicolas Cage actually playing Superman. But one of the most popular is I wish we could have gotten that test footage version of Green Goblin, because it would have been way creepier. But yeah,
I completely agree. I also, though, I see their point. The fact that I'm into my 40s now and just saw this makeup and like I said, can see it when I close my eyes. It was too scary for kids. I just think they probably made a good choice, as much as I would have preferred to see that version.
No, I agree.
They made a good choice, but they made a bad choice to replace it with. I think somewhere in between would have been the right answer.
Same, 100%.
Because they gave him like a flat metallic face, and what's ironic about it is that it is Willem Dafoe behind the mask. He performed 90% of his own stunts. The stuntmen could not figure out how to fly that hoverboard thing, and Dafoe could, because he's a very physical actor. So it's incredibly impressive that it's Dafoe throughout the whole thing. But at the same time, you don't really give a shit because you can't see his face. And what a loss. What a terrible loss to have Willem Dafoe in the costume the whole time.
Well, and that's what, as a when he was announced that he was playing the Green Goblin, I think fans across the world were like, "Oh my God, that's perfect! He already is paint him green. Let's go. Put him in purple pajamas." Like his face is so the proportions of that character that I feel robbed that we didn't get that performance that we could have gotten. So yeah, nailed it 100%.
Just to kind of link that back to something else, because there's actually a denture story to this movie as well. As we said in Wild at Heart, he was asked to put on dentures and he didn't think he was going to have to. And they made him put on these dentures to make his teeth look all tiny and grimy and nubby and gross. So for this, Sam Raimi told Dafoe, hey, we need to have you get your teeth fit for your dentures. And Defoe's like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm playing the Green Goblin, so I'm going to have some really nasty, pointy teeth. He's, no. you're playing a multimillionaire who would never have your teeth. So Dafoe had
I love that story. Yeah.
dentures to look like he had more normal teeth in order to play Osborne, the character that becomes
very ego-centric, like successful, like Trump type. Yeah, no, I love that story. Well, I don't know if it was on your agenda. One movie I do really want. I mean, there's a ton. I mean, we talk about the Florida Project, which was amazing. He's fucking great.
Fantastic. Everyone should see the Florida Project. Actually, we can leave it at that. But he's great.
I mean, he's Oscar nominated. But I want to talk about, because you talked about Schrader, I do want to talk about Autofocus, which I think is a movie that I can rewatch all the time. I think there's a lot of people who sort of not shit on Kinnear. Not Kinnear, on Greg Kinnear. He was also a talk show, right?
He was. Greg Kinnear was Talk Soup.
Yes, correct. Okay, good. I was confusing myself, but Greg Kinnear is great in that movie. He carries the movie as Bob Crane, the real, like a sort of biopic of the actor from Hogan's Heroes and the sort of sexual depravity that he ended up, like he was a sex addict before we knew what that was. But Willem Dafoe is John Carpenter, which he's a real person, but I just always go.
Not to be confused with the Halloween director. I think that's the bottom
with line. The famous director. But God, he's so good and so legitimately creepy. And
the pathos of it, because there are moments where you actually feel empathy for him.
Oh, absolutely.
Bob
Absolutely.
Crane treats him like shit at a certain point, and it does not paint a good picture of Bob Crane either, although it paints a very human picture. It deals with sex addiction and his
fame and all kinds of things.
The way his sex addiction manifested itself was the early years of videotape before people really had home VCRs and stuff. He was very looped into the technology of having tape and being able to replay it, and the idea that he could film his family and all of this. And he's introduced to this world by John Carpenter, who was just a guy who's basically the cable guy hooking up cable at his house, who said, hey, you ever seen this kind of a camera before? And they start to get into these sexual exploits behind his wife's back, where they are filming young women coming in to sleep with Hogan from Hogan's Heroes. And I've heard that the real Bob Crane was not quite as key as they portray him this, but I would also expect Bob Crane's family to take that stance, so I don't know whether I buy it.
Yeah.
Although Bob Crane's family, I think, was very active in this film. His son plays a reporter in the movie, so it's not as if it's completely unauthorized. And as a biopic, it comes from this era of biopics that still kind of exists. In fact, it very much exists today. It's the Scott Alexander and Larry Karajewski biopic. There's these two writers, and they're almost the only two writers I can think of. They're a team where their stamp is so pressed upon the films that they write that they have a style that I can attribute to them as much as any of the directors that they've worked, even though they don't direct their own work. But they kind of got their start, at least in the biofilm gang, they got their start with Problem Child. Let's just get that out of the way. Which they seem to be happy to talk about if you bring it up to them. But they got their start in the biopic genre by writing Ed Wood with Johnny Depp, which is
one of my all-time favorite movies.
Absolutely. Same here. And then they moved on. They did Man in the Moon with Jim Carrey. They most recently did My Name is Dolomite with Eddie Murphy, which I think was probably the most underrated movie of last year. Murphy should have gotten an Oscar nomination. That's ridiculous that he didn't. And Autofocus was not written by Scott Alexander and Larry Karajewski, but it felt like one of their movies. And I found out researching it that they actually consulted on it. So they helped the screenwriter of this movie, and that's why their stamp is definitely on it. But it shows also their influence on the biopic world. Every biopic since those guys started doing them has shown their influence, and it's I just have to point them out. But what a great movie. If you ever get a chance, Paul Schrader directed Autofocus. If you're interested in pop culture, if you're interested in television history, if you're interested in not unsolved, but unjustified crimes. I don't know what you would call it exactly. It's pretty clear that John Carpenter murdered Bob Crane in what almost seems like a jealousy sort of crime of passion.
A crime of passion, exactly.
They were not lovers necessarily, but they were definitely partners in crime in their whole sex addiction thing. And he felt betrayed, and he killed Bob Crane. And
they do sort of paint a picture that there might have been
one seems more into it than the other.
Yes, that there, that John Carpenter might have been a bisexual, that he might have actually had some sort of feelings for, mainly what, the whole thing is that they're both using each other. John Carpenter is using Bob Crane's fame, and Bob Crane is using, John Carpenter's connections with to the technology world, although at that one point that dries up, and he uses Bob Crane to get him girls and stuff, and they're using each other, but obviously Bob Crane is sort of the one carrying the deal. But
it ultimately feels like a movie about a love affair between those two guys, and there's definitely, they're doing stuff alone together without the girls around. It just isn't. It's more of a circle jerk sort of thing than a full-on homosexual experience. But it's alluded to and well done.
Remember,
in this movie.
remember, John Carpenter did stick his finger up Bob Crane's ass. So
this is true. This is true.
But I think it's a weird. And again, who knows how much of that is based off of reality? But there's definitely the film does portray it as a jilted lover kind of scenario, because Bob Crane ends his relationship with John Carpenter. John Carpenter's like, no, man, I'm enjoying this. I like this. Let's keep doing this. And so there's a jealousy and there's a sort of
but
it's a great movie, and I think it's
played to a level where you really feel sorry for John Carpenter, which is interesting because he is the bad guy here. And in real life, he was tried and was not convicted. He was acquitted of the death of Bob. And John Carpenter is no longer with us in this world, probably for the better, but he lived to be a very old and free man. And this is an interesting part of his life. We are starting to run long. There are two movies that I just am dying to mention.
Let's just talk about it. Let's get through it. I don't think that we can talk about... Let me take it. There's one that we definitely need to talk about. There's another one. I'm going to leave it up to you if you have any thoughts as Antichrist. I do. I have many thoughts, actually.
Okay, then let's get into Antichrist, because I found it to be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me your thoughts on it.
Well, first off, I like Lars von Trier films. Even if the Lars von Trier film isn't...
There's always an easy watch. Lars von Trier
never.
movies are never an easy watch. So these movies are not for everybody.
No, they're
trigger warnings up and down. If you're going to watch a Lars von Trier movie, his entire career is a trigger warning.
Absolutely, and he, I think his reputation was that he's some sort of sadist and some sort of. And I think that really came from Dancer in the Dark and what came out between him and Bjork and stuff. But he is, for all intents and purposes, though, he is a master filmmaker. I would say he is a genius in his way.
He started a movement and it stuck. Like most filmmakers that want to start a movement, as presumptuous and as conceited as that is, he managed to get Dogma 95 to become a thing.
Yeah. And mind you, of the Dogma 95 films, his are really the only ones I think people care about at this point or continue to watch. But as a filmmaker, he's made some amazing films. He's made some very, we'll say, impactful films, some films that really fucked with their audience. I would actually say, I didn't enjoy Nymphomaniac. I thought that, I think the Nymphomaniac films is where I think he started to become a little self-indulgent. But I don't know.
Agreed. That's why I wanted to talk about Antichrist if we can only talk about one. They are a trilogy, though.
Yes.
But I forget what the third one is. Melancholia. There we go.
Yeah. Which I like. I do like Melancholia. But and to me, honestly, though...
Maniac is a two-parter, so I guess you could say it's a four-part, but it's really a trilogy.
Yeah. Because I think, Nymphomaniac, I don't think was originally intended to be a sequel. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think it was he wanted to release a 5-hour movie. But first off, the performances are both great. Charlotte Gainsbourg, who's a very unique, she's the daughter of Serge Gainsbourg, this very famous and iconic French singer and performer. But she's got her own. She looks like the star of a Lars von Trier movie.
She reminds me a little bit of the woman that starred in The Shape of Water. I could see them playing sisters.
Yes, absolutely. It's a hard movie to watch, and all of the themes, the grief, and it's about
depression.
It's about grief.
Yes. Let's maybe before we go into some of the abstractions, I think we should probably tell people this is a movie about a couple that is at the beginning. You don't know that they're going through troubles. You just see them having very passionate sex while their child crawls out the high-rise window.
Falls out of a window and dies.
And the
Spoiler alert.
Yes, and the rest of the movie is dealing with the grief, especially her grief, becomes the focus.
Yes.
But what starts to flip is he's a therapist. Dafoe plays a therapist as the husband, and he insists on taking care of his own wife, even though he fully admits that he's not supposed to. And it really starts to become about how his way of dealing with the grief is oppressing her, and her grief is completely bringing him down, and how they may have actually been able to make something work, except for the fact that their two grieving processes were standing in so opposition of each other. And then it gets fucking violent.
Yeah, and it's very notorious for the explicit sexual mutilation. The
very few things made me close my eyes and turn away, and that did it.
Yeah, and there's a few sequences in this movie,
but especially that one.
Yes, I think we can. Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about the things that happened to Willem Dafoe, right? Not the right?
No, the
crunching of the.
I was able to watch that easier than I was able to watch her mutilate herself.
Yes. Okay. Because as I say, that's the hard one for me. But I will say the ejaculating blood thing was very.
I think that just says it all.
Yes, exactly. But the thing is, unlike, say, Serbian film, where even though, again, I've gone on record as saying I think Serbian film is better made than I think people give it credit for. It's actually a pretty well-made film. It's well acted, it's well written, and it's well constructed. But it is a film that sort of relies on the gratuitousness of the violence and the horrific things that happen during the movie. To me, dated to what the characters are going through and what their struggle is, their internal struggle and their struggle between themselves. And again, blaming, there's grief, there's blaming each other for the death of there's all these things, very heavy subjects that the movie deals with, but it's well made. And the movie looks incredible. Just the cinematography of the movie is incredible. There's all these design, very
there's a moment where it's there's this huge, the design of it. There's this moment where there's these big, huge tree roots, and there's hands reaching through the roots, and it's just it's mind-boggering. And of course, everything that's beautiful in that movie, they're like, okay, let's go fuck on it.
Yes, exactly. But it's very. By the way, also to bring up his prodigious member again.
Yes.
So they actually had to give him a stunt cock because they figured. Because Willem Dafoe just assumed he was going to show his cock and balls. Excuse my way of putting that, but they thought Willem Dafoe's like, yeah, I'm comfortable with nudity, and they're like, no, because nobody's going to believe that's really your penis. So they gave him a stunt.
This is why we put restricted on this podcast.
That's right, especially this episode apparently. But anyways, but yeah, I think it's a much better movie than people actually give it credit for. I think it's known for those factors, but it's again the I mean, obviously Willem Dafoe is great in this, but to me, Charlotte Gainsbourg is incredible. It's very much. Have we talked about Possession? The movie Possession with Isabella Adjani and
Gainsborough reminds me of Adjani. I was actually while I was watching it, I was actually thinking I need to ask Jim if parts of it reminded him of Possession.
Yeah,
you should say it. I love Possession.
Yes,
let's talk about that someday. It's not a Willem Dafoe movie, but goddamn, what a great movie.
No, but goddamn, dude, Sam Neill. When Sam Neill does horror, motherfucker nails it. But that movie's incredible. We can talk about Possession all day long. But it's such a movie about performance because really it's about these two human beings and what they do to each other emotionally and everything and physically. But yeah, it's a great movie. And I think it gets. I will say, as somebody who's seen Cello and seen I can stomach horrific things happening on screen. It is hard to watch. It's very hard to watch, and
I'm in that exact same camp. It almost works against it in a way. Although here we are talking about it and how beautifully it's done, but it really is a movie about the emotional turmoil that's going on, and these things are horrible physical manifestations of the horrible emotional things that these two parents are going through. And I think it does a slight disservice to itself because we are, even as film historians ourselves, talking more about the physical violence than we are about
the film
emotional.
itself. And yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But
absolutely.
I don't know how much of that was by design, but it's just a fact about the movie. It's just the way it's.
And I mean, I would definitely say Lars von Trier, that might, knowing his modus operandi. I mean, maybe it was intentional. I don't know. He's
very well could be.
But yeah, I think it's a great movie, and I think more people actually need to see it.
I agree.
But with the caveat that it's not for everybody.
Yeah, this is not. I'm willing to say that this is an amazing movie to about 20% of you, and everyone else is going to find it to be just too hard of a watch. Just to move on as quickly as I can, there are a couple of performances here just to mention. You mentioned the Florida Project. That's Dafoe at his most normal, and it's just lovely. And not that the movie is
lovely about
positive things per se, but his character is his character is the sunshiny character. I'm going to take that back. That's maybe not the best way to put it, but he is the most normal person. Everyone else is so Florida that it hurts. And it really does give an in-depth look at the life of a lot of people that not just in Florida, but I would imagine particularly in Florida and areas like here around Disneyland. People live in these hotels that used to be kind of tourist traps and are now just these dilapidated sort of almost assisted living places. Dafoe manages the hotel and has to deal with these, I'm just going to be honest with it, these shitty little kids that are just doing bad things the whole movie. They're adorable as well, but God, these kids are out of line. And he's the one that usually.
Well, and again, because they have a very weak. Yeah, I mean, their situation
mother
isn't the best.
Yes.
But
anyways, the Florida Project people should see. You mentioned Pasolini by Abel Ferreira, also a very good movie, but really more like if you're not already a Pasolini fan, I find it hard to think you're going to take anything away from it. It's about his final days when he was working on Solo, which is another movie much like Antichrist that is well known for being really brutal. And Pasolini ended up dying violently himself, and so this is about his final days. And I think paints like a pretty good portrait of him during that time, but I don't feel like I know more about his own story. It's like literally about this last 5 or so days. He also did At Eternity's Gate for Julian Schnabel.
Which
Dude, his Vincent van Gogh, he's... First off, Dafoe is a good 25 years older than Van Gogh was when he died, but he nails it. He brings such a level of sympathy to this artist. Everyone knows the Van Gogh story. Everyone knows cutting off the ear and all of this. People don't necessarily know the whys. We get the wrong idea that urban legend almost of he loved this woman so much that he cut off his ear for her.
Yeah.
The actual reason isn't any less crazy, but it was not for this girl. It was for another artist friend of his who he felt was leaving him stranded when he left town. And he gave it to the girl to give to this artist friend of his, played by Oscar Isaac. Also very good. But Dafoe, just on his face, my God, I am a bigger Vince Van Gogh fan because of this movie, and I was a fan already. Starry Night is one of my favorite things ever put onto canvas. But he brings a humanity to it that is expected, but still manages to overachieve in bringing this humanity. And Kirk Douglas also very famously played the same character and nailed it for his time. But this just smokes Kirk Douglas out of the water. It will give you a whole new appreciation of what being an artist is. And I actually walked away with, there's the old, it's not a myth, but it's kind of when people say an artist doesn't really become big until they die. Mm-hmm. That very much happened to Vincent van Gogh. Am I pronouncing it right, by the way? I never know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
They say it's Vincent van Gogh with a soft H at the end, but
that's the Dutch pronunciation. He was Dutch, but living in France. But anyways, I forget what I was going with.
Suffice to say, he does he does a good job, is what you're saying.
That's essentially what I'm saying, and people should check out that movie as well.
And Julian Schnabel's also as an actual painter and artist himself, he had a unique take on it. But he's also a great filmmaker. Diving Bell and the Butterfly. I happen to be a big fan of Basquiat. I love the performances in Basquiat. David Bowie as Andy Warhol is just too perfect. But
agreed.
But I'm a big fan of all of his films. I haven't seen his that film he did, like the pound sign horror, like Hashtag horror, whatever. I haven't seen that one, but I've seen all of his other films, but Before Night Falls and stuff. So I am a fan of Julian Schnabel, so I've been wanting to see it. And again, visually, the only thing I know is the trailer and some things I've seen, but visually the movie looked amazing. So.
Well, yeah, oftentimes the cinematography is trying to capture what Vincent van Gogh was seeing in nature. And there were arguments between him and Oscar Isaacs. They're arguing over like, well, do you paint what's in your mind or do you paint what you're seeing? Because isn't that just a copy? And Dafoe is arguing like, yes, it's a copy, but it's my interpretation of the copy. It's not what I'm actually seeing. It's my feelings about what I'm seeing. If you're an artist, it has some really great sort of artist back and forth and art analysis, let's say. And all of the paintings that are meant to look like the real Vincent van Gogh were actually done by Julian Schnabel and Willem Dafoe. So some of the...
Oh, I didn't know Willem Dafoe did them too.
Yes, some of the self-portraits of Van Gogh, which he's very famous for, were repainted in this movie to look more like Dafoe. And
yeah, I knew that. And I knew Schnabel. I think I just assumed Schnabel would do them, but...
No, they did them together. And you can see, like, it's very clear that Dafoe is painting on screen as well. And coming
That's
up
good.
with...
Because that always bugs the shit out. As an artist and as a painter myself, it bugs the shit out of me when I see fake painting or drawing in films.
It's the artistic version of lip syncing. Let's get with it, people. Let's at least teach your actors well enough how to do a couple of strokes on the canvas so it looks like they know what they're doing. Now, before we turn this into a two-parter, I can't leave without talking about The Lighthouse because that is one of my new favorite things ever. I'm assuming you saw The Lighthouse. I think I heard you talk about it on another podcast.
Yeah. It's funny because, I don't think I like it as much as The Witch, even though it takes way more chances creatively than The Witch. But I do think it's a strong film. And I do think, even though it's not, it's a loose interpretation of a story by Poe. It feels more like there's been a ton of adaptations and great adaptations, the Corman Poe films, but there's, to me,
call those
that
great
movie,
movies, but not great adaptations.
Exactly what I was going to, you nailed it. So this movie, while not being a very literal translation of Poe's work, slightly based off of one of his stories, it feels like Poe. It feels like the madness of Poe. I mean, both great performances, but I will say so people always want to shit on Robert Pattinson because he was in the Twilight films, but he is a great actor, and I think he's really good in this, but dude,
I have really enjoyed Robert Pattinson's whole process of making me a douchebag because of all the bad things I said about Twilight.
For real,
he's proved himself to be so incredible, especially
and he again the storytelling, the way it's filmed, the sort of weird. I hate to use the same sort of tired cliches, but the movie is sometimes it's very dreamlike, sometimes it's very nightmarish, but it's part of the story. You don't get a sense of time. Everything is sort of melding in with each other. One thing I really liked about it is farting. They're gross, like they're petty, but yeah, it's a very interesting movie. I think it's a good movie. Like I said, I did enjoy it. I would definitely say it's for a particular audience. So yeah, it's not for everybody, but it's a really interesting movie. And I think, like I said, I think he's a great filmmaker. Everybody talks about Ari Aster, rightfully so too, because Ari Aster is making good films. And I hate when people shit all over. I forget, there's a name for this new sort of era of horror, good filmmaking. I just made this comment there's this guy named Nathan Thomas Milner, and he's a very successful illustrator for he does a lot of movie posters and DVD covers and stuff like that. But because there's a guy talking about how he's like, oh, I really loved your list of best horror movies of the last 10 years, except for Hereditary or whichever one he put on there. And I was like, dude, it's like if I'm sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent, but I'll come back to my point, I promise. But I was like, if a movie like Hereditary or I'll even say The Witch, actually, I might have actually been The Witch. Might be wrong. Maybe I'm actually putting this in Ari Aster and it wasn't. But I was like, if a movie like The Witch or even say Hereditary or Midsommar had come out in the 70s, it would have just been a movie, and a movie you probably admit that you like. But because it came out in the 2000s, in the 2020s, now you think it's pretentious. But, is it any more pretentious than, a movie like Rosemary's Baby or, Wicker Man?
Wicker Man clearly influenced Midsommar. These are, they're not particularly, Lighthouse, I would say, actually is pretty intellectual. The other ones,
yes,
they just take their time to develop their character and their story, and that is something that modern audiences don't seem to be in tune with. But you're absolutely right. They're movies where the very things that they're criticizing them for are the very things they would have loved about them had they come out 30 or 40 years ago.
Absolutely. 100%.
And not because culture has changed in a positive direction in this way. These are the movies that 20, 30 years from now, people are going to still be talking about. And you're going to say, I didn't get it at the time. But then people are going to be smacking you and saying, how could you not get this? These are clearly the good horror movies, and you wasted your time going to see Fantasy Island. But what I love about The Lighthouse, I really felt, speaking of pretentious, this is going to sound pretentious, but it's the kind of movie that makes me want to make movies. Not that this is necessarily my audience or my style, but I got so excited by the style. And discovering that, what's his name? Robert Eggers, I believe, is the name of the director.
Correct, yeah.
And what he did, the movie takes place in the late 19th century. I think it's like actually 1890. And he used old cameras. This wasn't shot digitally. It was shot on film, and he used some older cameras. But what made it really work was that he used lenses that dated back to like the 1890s. I think the most contemporary lens he used to shoot on in this movie was 1936.
That's so crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it has a very real authenticity to the way it looks. It looks like old film. And he used filters as well to capture the way that film was processed at the time, which was particularly difficult in black and white on the color red, which means that reds come out very dark. And since all of us white people have a good amount of red actually in our faces, it made their faces intensely dark and shadowy. And it's this attention to that particular detail that really sold it to me. As absurd as the rest of the movie gets, I mean, the shit with the seagull is insane. The Prometheus ending, which it's only a spoiler alert if you know Prometheus. The mythology, not the Ridley Scott. And
yes. But, good point. I wouldn't even thought of that.
But Dafoe in this film as like kind of this salty old sea dog who's been running this lighthouse for way too long. His performance, I can't remember even who won the Oscar last year. I can't remember if it was a situation where they robbed someone else or what, but there should have been a special Oscar made just for Willem Dafoe's performance in this. The scene where he throws down a sailor's sea curse on Robert Pattinson's character because Robert Pattinson refuses to agree that he cooks a good lobster because this is how insane these guys are going. But he stands up and they give him definitely like the hero shot where it's down below looking up at him and his face is very deeply shadowed and he has this grand beard that just is in black and white, somehow still full of color, and this look on his face, and he gives this 3-minute long incantation and he doesn't blink his eyes even once in one take. And just that scene alone, it deserves its own award. Much more than, say, Antichrist, which I would recommend, like I said, to maybe 20% of our audience. I think Lighthouse is actually the type of movie that should be seen by more people, including people who wouldn't maybe ordinarily like this kind of movie, because it's a good gateway movie for those types of people to really understand what this kind of a movie can be. You might hate it, but you'll have been kind of rewarded for having seen it. And if you're movie curious, this might turn out to be just the kind of thing that's up your alley. So I do give this a full recommendation. If you don't like it, that's on you. But
well, that's the thing. I will say the one thing is that, and not to get too pretentious with this, but to me, it's a true film. Like, there are movies which are made with the input of, studios and test audiences, and that's not a criticism either. I mean,
no, some of the best movies are made that way.
Absolutely, but you can tell this is definitely a film that was the vision and the product of a singular sort of artist and an auteur or whatever. But you can tell this was a movie he really wanted to make and was passionate about and had a very specific vision. And again, he's a fantastic filmmaker. I think I was just saying this recently. He's somebody I'm always excited. If I hear he's got something new, I check his IMDB page pretty regularly just to see if there's anything new he's working on. I feel the same way about Ari Aster, and again, I know he's very polarizing. To me, like I said, as popular as Hereditary and Midsommar were, I still think The Witch and The Lighthouse weren't as widespread that people. I know more people that saw Hereditary than saw The Witch. I know a lot of people hate The Witch, but those people can all kiss my ass. I think
out of all four of those, I think Hereditary is kind of naturally the most approachable as a
yes, absolutely,
as a non-film connoisseur.
Yes. Agreed, 100%.
But if you think you might secretly be a snob like us, Lighthouse is definitely the movie to watch this Halloween. He's
great little black and white, little. It's like psychological horror is the way I would.
Yes. Two people, one location. Most of the weather in the movie was real. Almost everybody stayed in a local hotel, including Pattinson, but Dafoe actually stayed in the little fisherman's house next to the lighthouse, which I love.
Of course.
Don't know how necessary it was, but if that's the way that Willem Dafoe works, that's a perfect thing. As we close out here, it's also worth pointing out, a dude was in Murder on the Orient Express. He was in Aquaman. Dafoe still continues to be in big movies. He was in Motherless Brooklyn, which I really, really enjoyed. I don't know if anybody else saw that. I'm a lover of film noir, and this is about as close as anyone's gotten to doing a straight film noir since, say, LA Confidential, in terms of actually doing it as a period piece. So that was directed by Edward Norton. Fine film.
I wanted to see it. I'm a huge Edward Norton fan, despite some of his public persona as far as him as a pain in the ass actor or director. But it looked phenomenal. But I hadn't gotten around to seeing it. I actually, until you said that, I've been wanting to see it. Like I said, Edward Norton. He plays like sort of like a. Does he have like a mental disorder? Like what is the...
He has Tourette's syndrome.
Tourette's, thank you. I knew it was something like that, but it looked really good. Again, I'm always interested to see like a new noir, but until you just said that, I forgot Willem Dafoe was even in it. It's a movie I've been wanting to check out.
It's on HBO Max now.
Well, I have HBO Max, so let's do it.
Definitely. Yeah, check out Motherless Brooklyn. Add that to Dog Eat Dog and text me when it's done, because I want somebody to talk to about that movie.
Sounds good.
I loved Motherless Brooklyn. I'm not going to deep dive on it because we're coming so close to the end, and Dafoe really doesn't play anything reaching the biggest role in that movie. And Edward Norton probably should have been Oscar nominated, because I've never seen a Tourette's performance. I'm not even sure I've seen a Tourette's performance. I can't think of any other act. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it's out there.
Just comedically. I guarantee you never in a... Yeah.
But, yeah, that reminds me, actually, there's a really horrible representation of Tourette's syndrome in the Boondock Saints with the bartender that keeps on saying ass fuck for some reason. But because that's apparently what people think Tourette's is. It's not just dirty words. It's obsessive compulsive. Tics. It's physical tics. It's verbal tics. In this, he keeps on saying if through the whole movie. He's just if. And people want him to finish the sentence. And there's a scene where he's lighting a woman's cigarette, because this is the 1950s. Every time he lights the match and holds it to her cigarette, he blows it out. And she thinks that he's having a gag on her. But he's trying to explain to many people in this movie, I'm sorry, I have this condition, I can't help it. He's even telling the villain at one point, played by with sinister sort of natural Trumpism by Alec Baldwin. And he even has to he apologizes to the villain in the movie, saying, I'm sorry, I can't help it. So it's kind of interesting to see the way that he has to cope with the world, and the world copes with him. And most people in the movie seem to be pretty understanding, although he does, amongst his quote-unquote friends, have the nickname Freak Show, and he hates it. But that's a good movie. People should check that out. And to just kind of give a shout-out to the things that are coming up, if you look at Willem Dafoe's IMDB page, if you think that the world was slowing down because of COVID, nobody asked Willem Dafoe. He's got 2 more movies with Abel Ferrara. The French Dispatch for Wes Anderson, which we probably should have mentioned his stuff with Wes Anderson. Yep. His part in Life Aquatic.
Absolutely. I was going to...
In fact, go for it if you want to.
His character in Life Aquatic is sort of in a movie full of scene stealers. How do you steal scene when Bill Murray's involved? But I remember coming out of the thing, and I remember exactly, and I remember coming out of that movie, and everybody was talking about Willem Dafoe and how great he was, because you don't naturally associate Willem Dafoe with comedy, even though he's done comedic kind of performances, but he's great in it. He's always great, and it's a weird, because he didn't work with him until Life Aquatic, so Wes Anderson had sort of already made some big pictures. But as soon as he was part of the Wes Anderson crew, you're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, like of course he was going to do it. So, and I guess Wes Anderson was actually a big Willem Dafoe fan. But yeah, his stuff with Wes Anderson's great. Specifically, Life Aquatic, I love his.
But he's now in The French Dispatch by Wes Anderson, which is coming soon. He's going to be in Nightmare Alley with Guillermo del Toro, who I don't believe he's ever worked with before, but seems like a perfect match again.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got in post-production, he's got a movie called The Card Counter by Paul Schrader. So he's back with Schrader. And then Robert Eggers, the director of The Lighthouse, has him in a movie right now called The North.
Yep. Which looks pretty dope too. So I'm very excited.
So yes, Willem Dafoe. Thank you, William Dafoe, for being such an exception to the rule. Every time I do one of these podcasts, I inevitably say, how come nobody makes this kind of movie anymore? And just smack me next time and say, Willem Dafoe makes this kind of movie still. He's at once a throwback and the future of acting at the same time. Any final words on?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it speaks volume to his talent and his legacy that he continues to still not only just work and be in demand, but continues to turn out performances like The Florida Project or The Lighthouse, where he's well into his film career and he's still doing vital roles, like vital work, really important stuff. So big fan, always will be a big fan. And this was a very long but very fun podcast.
Yes, thanks for bearing with us. I think this is a better solution than making this 2 parts on Willem Dafoe. Next time, maybe we'll pick a Halloween-y kind of topic that we can talk about in a little bit of a shorter fashion. But I have fun. I hope our audience has fun. We might have a special guest next week, so come and check us out for that. I hope we have a special guest.
I think
next
we might.
We've talked to him, but we haven't scheduled anything yet. But I've already started to watch some movies by this filmmaker just to brush up on the very few that I would ever need to brush up on, because the rest of his work I'm very familiar with already. But if you want to keep up with us, make sure you're checking us out on Facebook and Twitter. I have tried to do my best to be more prolific, and it seems to be working. We are finally having a couple of posts that are taking off. In fact, we had, I think, over 300 likes on a post that I put up of Canon movies playing at an old grindhouse in Times Square. So,
and I do want to say, if you are on our social media and you're reaching out, if we haven't responded to any of your messages, private messages or things, just it's been a busy week, but we're both going to start being more engaged in our social media. We appreciate all of the feedback, all of the messages, especially people seem to be enjoying what we're doing and also sharing their own memories and their own opinions, which is what I love. I love the discourse about film. So keep that up, and we promise we'll be even more involved than we are.
So yeah, make sure to look us up, Den of Sin. You know what? I'm going to officially maybe make this the last time I spell it for people. People should start to get it by now. Den of Sin is CIN as in cinema. Whoever thought of that name? Jesus Christ. Oh, wait. I think it was me.
I think people get it. In fact, if they're listening to this, they must have found it. So
right. But yeah, make sure you like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can hear us, new episodes and old episodes, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts. We're now on Amazon, and we're also on YouTube. So just about anywhere you'd like to listen, you can find us. We also have our original homepage on buzzsprout.com. I don't know if it's go to our actual page. We are working on getting a actual operating website that is completely our own domain. At that point, we'll set up an email address and start to get some real comments and start to direct you that way. But if you can shoot us some suggestions as to what you'd like to see there. Would you like to see show notes, links to where you can find these movies we discuss, or if people are up for it, I'm sure James and I would even be interested in blogging and putting up some other artwork that's inspired by some of these films that we talk about.
Absolutely.
So let us know what you want to find in that. And until next time, be safe, and under the current climate, stay sane.
That's right. And watch a Willem Dafoe movie.
Yes, watch a couple of them.
Yeah.
Have a good night, James.
Later, Devin. Always a pleasure.
Always.